The horse came at her like a storm breaking loose. Mirabelle Mercer dropped her slate and lunged sideways as the animal tore past the schoolhouse steps, reins snapping wild, saddle empty and crooked. Dust rose in a choking cloud. Children shrieked behind her. She didn't think. She ran. Her boots hammered the frozen dirt of Eagle Bend's main street. The horse wheeled near the Mercantile, eyes rolling white. She grabbed a loose rein on the second pass and dug her heels in hard. The animal reared. She held on. Her shoulders screamed. The horse came down hard and stood trembling, foam slick on its neck. A man staggered around the corner of the feed store, one hand pressed to his ribs, hat gone, coat streaked with mud. He stopped when he saw her holding his horse. His face was all hard lines and exhaustion. Dark brown hair stuck to his forehead. Gray eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her pulse kick. He didn't say thank you. He said, "You shouldn't have done that." His voice was low and rough, like he'd been shouting into wind for hours. He limped forward and took the reins from her hands. His fingers brushed hers, calloused, steady despite the blood seeping through his shirt. "You're bleeding," she said. He glanced down like he'd forgotten. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. You need a doctor." He shook his head. "I need to leave town." Now. She should have stepped back. Let him go. She'd learned long ago not to ask questions, not to get involved, not to let anyone look too close. But something in his face stopped her. Desperation, maybe. Or the kind of honesty that came from a man who had nothing left to lose. Behind them, boots hit the boardwalk. Voices rose. She turned and saw 3 men moving toward them from the direction of the land office. The one in front wore a badge. His hand rested on his gun belt. "Mercer Granger." The sheriff called. "You're coming with me." The man beside her, Mercer, tensed. His jaw tightened. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't run. He just stood there, bleeding and beaten, like he'd already given up. Mirabelle's heart hammered. She knew that look. She'd worn it herself once. The sheriff closed the distance. 2 deputies flanked him. One carried a coil of rope. The other had his rifle half raised. "What's he done?" she heard herself ask. The sheriff's gaze flicked to her, dismissive. "That's not your concern, Miss Mercer." Her stomach dropped. He knew her name. Everyone in Eagle Bend knew her name. The quiet school teacher who'd arrived 6 months ago with a single trunk and no references worth mentioning. The woman who kept to herself, never attended socials, never asked for anything. "If you're arresting him," she said, "then tell me why." The sheriff's mouth thinned. "Theft." "Fraud." "Violation of railroad easement agreements." He gestured to Mercer. "Mr. Granger here has been refusing to vacate Larkspur Ranch despite a legal order. He assaulted a surveyor this morning and destroyed property markers." "That's a lie," Mercer said quietly. The deputies moved closer. Mirabelle's mind raced. She didn't know this man. She had no reason to defend him. But she knew the look of a railroad land grab when she saw one. She'd watched her father lose everything to men in clean suits who rewrote contracts in back rooms. "I saw him fall from his horse," she said. "That's why he's injured. There was no fight." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You saw that, did you?" "Yes." "From the schoolhouse." She met his stare without flinching. "I was outside. The children were at recess." It was a flimsy lie, and they both knew it. The schoolhouse sat 100 yards back. She couldn't have seen anything. But the sheriff hesitated. A school teacher's word carried weight in a town like Eagle Bend, even if she was a stranger. Mercer turned his head and looked at her. Really looked. His expression shifted, surprise breaking through the exhaustion. She felt the weight of it, the question he wasn't asking. Why would you risk this? She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, and it was too dangerous to admit. The sheriff stepped closer. His voice dropped. Miss Mercer, I don't know what your interest is in this man, but I suggest you step aside. This is legal business. Then show me the warrant, she said. His face darkened. You don't want to make this your problem. She already had. The moment she'd opened her mouth, she'd stepped into something she couldn't walk away from. That was the way it always went. You tried to stay hidden, tried to keep your head down, and then one moment of honesty dragged you back into the light. The wind picked up. Dust swirled between the buildings. The sky to the west had turned a sickly yellow-gray. Storm coming. A bad one. We'll discuss this at the jail, the sheriff said. He reached for Mercer's arm. Mercer pulled back. I'm not going anywhere until I see that warrant. The deputy with the rifle raised it an inch. The crowd that had been gathering on the boardwalk went quiet. Mirabelle felt the moment tipping toward violence. She'd seen it before. Men with power didn't like being questioned. They especially didn't like being questioned in public. She stepped between Mercer and the sheriff. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. If you arrest him without cause, I'll file a complaint with the territorial judge. I'll write to the land office in Cheyenne. I'll make sure every newspaper between here and Denver knows Eagle Bend's law enforcement is in the railroad's pocket. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. She'd just called the sheriff corrupt in front of half the town. It was reckless. Stupid. Exactly the kind of thing she'd sworn never to do again. But Mercer was still standing. And the rifle had lowered. The sheriff's face went hard as stone. You're making a mistake, Miss Mercer. She didn't answer. She just held his gaze until he turned and walked away, deputies trailing behind him. The crowd on the boardwalk murmured. Somewhere a door slammed. The wind gusted again, colder now, carrying the smell of rain and dust. Mirabelle turned back to Mercer. He was staring at her like she'd just pulled him out of a river. Why did you do that? He asked. She didn't know how to answer. Because you looked like you were telling the truth. Because I know what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do. Because for 6 months I've been invisible and I'm tired of it. You need to get that wound looked at, she said instead. He shook his head. I need to get back to the ranch. If I'm not there, they'll move in and take everything. Then let me help you. He gave her a long, measuring look. You don't know me. I know you didn't assault anyone. I know the railroad wants your land. That's enough. It was insane. She was risking everything she'd built, the fragile safety of her new life for a stranger. But something in his eyes made her want to be reckless. Made her want to step into the fire instead of hiding from it. The storm hit before they reached the edge of town. One moment the sky was bruised and threatening. The next, the world disappeared into a wall of dust and wind. Mirabelle pulled her coat tight and bent her head against the blast. Beside her, Mercer fought to keep his horse steady. The animal danced sideways, spooked by the roar of the wind. We can't ride in this, she shouted over the noise. There's a line shack a mile out, he called back. We can wait it out there. She nodded and grabbed the saddle. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion despite his injury. She wrapped her arms around his waist and felt the heat of him through the layers of fabric. Felt the tension in his body, the pain he wasn't admitting. Her cheek pressed against his shoulder as the horse lunged forward into the storm. The world became noise and chaos. Dust filled her mouth and nose. She couldn't see past Mercer's back. She just held on and trusted him to find the way. It felt like drowning in dry air. Her lungs burned. Her eyes watered. She buried her face against his coat and counted heartbeats to keep from panicking. When the horse finally stopped, she barely registered it. Mercer slid down and pulled her after him. She stumbled. He caught her. His hands steadied her as he pushed open a door she couldn't see and dragged her inside. The sudden quiet felt like a miracle. Mirabelle bent over, coughing, trying to clear the dust from her throat. Mercer moved past her and she heard the scrape of a match, then the flare of lantern light. The line shack was tiny. One room, a narrow cot, a stove, a table with 2 chairs, rough-hewn walls chinked with mud, a single small window, already half buried in drifting dust. Mercer leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. His face was gray under the dirt. "Sit down," she said. "Let me see that wound." He didn't argue. He dropped onto the cot and started unbuttoning his shirt with clumsy fingers. She knelt beside him and brushed his hands away. The fabric was stiff with dried blood. She peeled it back carefully. The gash along his ribs was deep but clean. No sign of infection yet. "This needs stitches," she said. "There's a kit in the saddlebag." She found it and brought it back. Her hands were steadier than she expected as she threaded the needle. She'd done this before, too many times. Her brother's knife wounds, her father's split knuckles, the gash on her own arm the night she'd climbed out a window and run. "This is going to hurt," she said quietly. "I know." She pressed the needle through skin and he sucked in a breath, but didn't move. She worked quickly, small even stitches, the way her mother had taught her before everything fell apart. His breathing stayed controlled. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell the sweat and dust and blood. "You're good at this," he said after a moment. "I've had practice. Family. Something like that." She tied off the last stitch and reached for a strip of clean cloth to bind the wound. His hand caught her wrist. Gentle, but firm. She looked up and met his eyes. They were very gray, very steady, very close. "Thank you," he said. Her pulse kicked. She was suddenly aware of how little space there was between them, of his bare chest under her hands, of the way he was looking at her, like he was trying to read a language he didn't quite know. "You still haven't told me why you helped me," he said. She pulled her wrist free and focused on wrapping the bandage. Because it was the right thing to do. People in Eagle Bend don't usually care about right. They care about safe. "Maybe I'm tired of safe." The words came out before she could stop them, true and raw and more honest than she'd been in months. His hand came up and touched her chin, tilting her face toward his. She should pull away. She should put distance between them. But she didn't. "Who are you really, Mirabelle Mercer?" he asked softly. "Nobody," she said. "Just a school teacher." "You're lying." "Yes." He smiled. It changed his whole face, softened the hard edges, made him look younger and less hunted. "I'm lying too." "About what?" "Everything that matters." Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the silence stretched tight as a wire. She finished tying the bandage and sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking now. He noticed. "You should rest," she said. "The storm could last hours." "What about you?" "I'll keep watch." He caught her hand again. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "You don't have to do that. I'm not going to hurt you." I know. And she did. It was insane. But she believed him. Believed it in a way she hadn't believed anything in a long time. This man, bleeding and beaten and running from something he wouldn't name, felt safer than every careful choice she'd made since arriving in Eagle Bend. Tell me about the ranch, she said. Why does the railroad want it so badly? He let go of her hand and leaned back against the wall. His expression went distant. Larkspur Ranch sits on the only good water between here and the rail line. They need it for the new spur. Without it, they have to reroute 20 miles south. Costs them time and money. So they're trying to force you out. They already did. 3 weeks ago, a man showed up with a deed that says the ranch belongs to the Wyoming Land Development Corporation. Said my family's title was invalid. Forged signatures, backdated contracts, the whole machine. Do you have proof it's fake? She asked. I had proof. The original deed, signed by my grandfather in 1862. I kept it in a strongbox at the ranch. 2 days ago, someone broke in and stole it. Her chest tightened. Without that deed, you have nothing. Without that deed, I'm a squatter. And the railroad has legal grounds to remove me by force. She stood and paced to the small window. The dust outside was so thick she couldn't see more than a few feet. It felt like the end of the world. Like they were the only two people left. Who do you think took it? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, someone I trusted. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. She turned and looked at him. He was staring at his hands. Strong hands, scarred and calloused. The kind that built things and fought for them. I'm sorry, she said. He shrugged. My fault for believing people are better than they are. She understood that. She'd believed her brother would protect her. Believed her father would choose her over his pride. Believed the man she'd run from would let her go. All of it had been a mistake. What will you do now? She asked. I don't know. Fight, I guess. Even if it's hopeless. It's not hopeless. There are other ways to prove ownership. Witness statements, tax records, survey maps. He looked up at her. You sound like you've done this before. She froze. She'd said too much. Let the mask slip. He was watching her with that same steady intensity, reading things she didn't want read. I just know how these things work, she said carefully. No. You know because you've been through it. Someone took something from you. Something that mattered. She turned away. This isn't about me, isn't it? You're here. You lied to the sheriff. You're risking everything for a stranger. Why? Because I couldn't watch them destroy you the way they destroyed my family. The words tore out of her before she could lock them down. She pressed her hand to her mouth, horrified. She never talked about this, never let anyone close enough to ask. But the storm and the lantern light and the blood on her hands had stripped away her defenses. Mercer stood. He crossed the small space between them and stopped just behind her. She could feel the heat of him at her back. Feel the question he wasn't asking. What happened? He said quietly. My father owned a freight company. Not big, but honest. When the railroad came through, they wanted his roots. He wouldn't sell. So they ruined him. Spread rumors he was skimming cargo, bribed inspectors to find violations, turned his own drivers against him. Within 6 months, he'd lost everything. And you. She closed her eyes. I tried to help. Testified in court. It didn't matter. The judge was paid off. My father died of a heart attack a week after the verdict. My brother blamed me for pushing him to fight. said I should have convinced him to take the settlement. That's not fair. No. But he believed it. And when the railroad men came back asking questions about who'd helped my father hide assets, my brother told them it was me. Gave them my name, my address, everything. Her voice broke. She felt Mercer's hand settle on her shoulder. Warm. Steady. Grounding. So you ran, he said. I didn't have a choice. They would have arrested me for fraud. Possibly worse. I took what I could carry and disappeared. Changed my name. Found a job in a town where nobody asks questions. And I've been invisible ever since. Until today. Until today. She turned and looked up at him. His face was closer than she expected. His eyes were full of something she didn't dare name. I'm sorry, he said, for what they did to you, for what your family did. It doesn't matter now. It matters. He lifted his hand and touched her cheek, brushing away a smudge of dust. You didn't deserve any of that. Neither did you. Maybe we're both just unlucky. Or maybe we're exactly where we're supposed to be. The air between them felt electric. She couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. His thumb traced the line of her jaw and she felt herself leaning into the touch, drawn by something stronger than caution or fear. The storm outside roared louder. The walls of the line shack creaked. She didn't care. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand and the steady beat of his heart, and the way he was looking at her like she was something precious instead of damaged. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry and full of all the things neither of them had said. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his hair, her body pressing against his. He made a low sound in his throat and pulled her closer. She forgot about the storm, forgot about the danger, forgot about every reason this was a terrible idea. All that mattered was this. Him. The heat and the need and the wild, reckless feeling that maybe, just maybe, she could stop running. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. His forehead rested against hers. His hands were still tangled in her hair. This is insane, she whispered. I know. We barely know each other. I know. This can't go anywhere. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Why not? Because I'm running from something I can't outrun. Because you're about to lose everything. Because we're both liars and we don't trust anyone. And this is just going to end badly. He smiled. That crooked, devastating smile. So we're doomed. Completely. Good. I'm tired of safe, too. She laughed. It came out shaky and a little wild. He kissed her again, slower this time, and she let herself fall into it. Let herself believe, just for a moment, that this could be real. The storm raged for 3 more hours. They spent it tangled together on the narrow cot, talking in low voices, learning the shape of each other's damage. He told her about his parents dying in a winter fever when he was 17. About raising his younger sister alone. About watching her marry a good man and move to California and leave him with a ranch that felt too big and too empty. She told him about her mother's death when she was 12. About her father's slow descent into bitterness. About the moment she'd realized her brother cared more about his own safety than hers. About the 2 years she'd spent moving from town to town, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for someone to recognize her face. I don't even know if Mirabelle Mercer is a safe name anymore, she said quietly. Sometimes I think I should move again. Start over somewhere new. His arm tightened around her. Don't. Why not? Because I just found you. I'm not ready to lose you yet. Her throat closed. She pressed her face against his shoulder and let herself feel it. The wanting. The fear. The terrible, fragile hope that maybe this time would be different. When the storm finally broke, the world outside was transformed. Dust lay in drifts against the walls. The sky was clear and cold and impossibly blue. Mercer's horse stood near the door, looking miserable but unharmed. We should get back, Mercer said. But he didn't move. He just stood there with his hand in hers, looking at the wreckage like he was memorizing it. What happens now? She asked. I go back to the ranch. Try to find another way to prove ownership. Hope the railroad doesn't move in before I can fight this in court. And if they do, then I lose everything and start over. Again. She squeezed his hand. I'll help you. However I can. He turned and looked at her. Mirabelle, you don't have to do this. You have a life here. A job. You can walk away. I could. But I won't. Why not? Because you didn't walk away from me. Because I'm tired of being afraid. Because maybe, if I help you fight, I'll remember how to fight for myself. He pulled her close and kissed her, hard and quick and full of promise. Then he swung up onto his horse and pulled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around him and they rode back toward Eagle Bend through a world scrubbed clean and glittering with light. But when they crested the ridge above town, Mirabelle's stomach dropped. Smoke rose from the direction of Larkspur Ranch, thick and black and wrong. Mercer kicked the horse into a gallop. Mirabelle held on tight, her heart hammering against her ribs. They reached the ranch 15 minutes later. The barn was gone, just a smoking ruin of charred timber and ash. The house still stood, but the windows were broken. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Mercer slid down and ran toward the wreckage. Mirabelle followed. Inside the barn's remains, she could see the twisted shapes of tools and tack. The stalls where horses had been were empty. Hoofprints led away toward the north, too many to count. They took everything, Mercer said flatly. The horses, the cattle, every piece of equipment worth selling. Who? He turned and she saw the fury in his face. The railroad, or the men they hired. Doesn't matter. It's all legal now. Once that fake deed goes through, they can claim I abandoned the property. Everything here becomes theirs by salvage rights. We'll report it, she said. We'll tell the sheriff. The sheriff works for them. You saw that today. Then we'll go over his head. Territorial Marshal. Federal Land Office. With what proof? The deed is gone. My livestock is gone. I've got nothing but a burned barn and a debt I can't pay. He walked away from her, shoulders tight with rage and grief. She wanted to go to him, wanted to touch him, to offer comfort. But she knew that wouldn't help. He needed to feel this, needed to let the anger burn through him before he could think clearly again. She walked through the ruins instead, searching for anything that might help. The strong box where he'd kept the deed was lying on its side near the back wall, door torn off, interior empty. She picked through the debris, found a scorched ledger, a broken picture frame, a child's toy horse, half melted. And then she saw it, a piece of paper wedged under a fallen beam. She pulled it free carefully. It was singed at the edges but still readable. A letter, addressed to Mercer Granger at Larkspur Ranch. She scanned the contents and her blood went cold. It was from a lawyer in Cheyenne, dated 2 weeks ago. It confirmed receipt of the original ranch deed and requested Mercer's presence for a property transfer consultation. "Mercer," she called. He turned. She held up the letter. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and took it from her hands. His face went from confusion to shock to cold understanding. "I never sent the deed to Cheyenne," he said quietly. "But someone did. Someone who had access to your strongbox." He looked up at her. His jaw was tight. "There's only one person I gave a key to. My foreman, Clay Ridgway. He's worked here for 5 years. I trusted him with everything." "Where is he now?" Mirabelle asked. "I don't know. He left 3 days ago. Said he had family business in Laramie. I told him to take his time." She met his eyes. "He's not in Laramie. He's wherever the railroad is paying him to be." Mercer's hands tightened on the letter. His knuckles went white. The rage that crossed his face was cold and dangerous. For a moment she thought he might tear the paper apart. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his coat. "We need to find him," he said. "Agreed. But first we need to figure out where the deed actually is. If it's in Cheyenne, we can get it back. If the lawyer is legitimate, he'll have records. And if the lawyer is part of the fraud, then we're back to nothing." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Why are you still here, Mirabelle? You could walk away right now. Go back to town. Pretend you never met me. You'd be safe." She stepped closer. "Safe isn't the same as alive. You don't owe me this." "I know. But I'm staying anyway." He reached out and cupped her face in both hands. His touch was gentle despite the fury still burning in his eyes. "You're the bravest person I've ever met. Or the most foolish. Maybe both." He kissed her, slow and deep and full of all the things they didn't have time to say. She kissed him back and tried not to think about how this might end. Tried not to imagine losing him the way she'd lost everything else. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was setting. The ruins of the barn looked like a grave. Mirabelle shivered. Mercer pulled off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "Come on," he said. "Let's go back to town. We'll figure this out." They rode double again, moving slowly through the cold twilight. Eagle Bend's lights appeared in the distance like fallen stars. Mirabelle rested her cheek against Mercer's back and felt the steady rhythm of his breathing. She wanted to memorize this. The weight of him, the smell of smoke and leather and sweat, the feeling of being held even while riding into an uncertain future. But when they reached the edge of town, Mercer pulled the horse to a stop. "Someone's following us," he said quietly. She turned and looked back. At first she saw nothing but empty road and gathering dark. Then a shape detached from the shadows. A rider on a gray horse moving at a steady trot, close enough to be deliberate, far enough to avoid confrontation. "Who is it?" she whispered. "I don't know. But they've been behind us since we left the ranch." He urged the horse forward, faster now. The rider behind them matched their pace. When they turned onto Main Street, the rider turned too. When they stopped in front of the boarding house where Mirabelle rented a room, the rider stopped a block away and waited. Mercer dismounted and helped Mirabelle down. His hand stayed on his gun belt. "Go inside," he said. "Lock your door." "What about you?" "I'll deal with this." She grabbed his arm. "No. We deal with it together. Mirabelle, I'm not leaving you out here alone." He looked like he wanted to argue. Then he sighed and nodded. They walked toward the waiting rider together. As they got closer, The figure resolved into a woman, older, maybe 50, wearing a man's coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Her face was weathered and sharp. Her eyes glittered in the lamplight. "Mercer Granger," she said. Her voice was rough as gravel. "Been a long time." "Who are you?" Mercer asked. The woman smiled. It wasn't friendly. "Name's Ruth Calhoun. I rode with your grandfather back in the Dakota Territory, before he went straight and bought that ranch of yours." Mirabelle felt Mercer tense beside her. Ruth Calhoun. The name meant nothing to her, but clearly it meant something to him. "My grandfather never mentioned you," Mercer said carefully. "Wouldn't expect him to. We didn't part on good terms. But I kept track. Heard about the trouble you're in. Thought I might offer some help." "Why?" "Because your grandfather saved my life once. And because I don't like seeing railroad men steal what's not theirs." Mercer didn't relax. "What kind of help?" "Information. I know where your foreman is. And I know who he's working for." Mirabelle's pulse quickened. "Where?" Ruth's gaze shifted to her, assessing. "Who's this?" "Someone who has a stake in this," Mercer said flatly. "If you've got information, share it. Otherwise, move on." Ruth chuckled. "You've got your grandfather's temper. All right. Your man Clay is holed up at the Harrison Hotel. 3rd floor. Room 14. He's meeting with a railroad attorney tomorrow morning to finalize the deed transfer." "Tomorrow morning," Mirabelle repeated. "That's not much time." "No. But it's enough if you're smart." Ruth leaned forward in her saddle. "There's something else you should know. The railroad isn't just after your ranch. They're planning to take every property between here and the rail line. 6 families, all of them with clouded titles or forged documents. Yours is just the first." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if you can prove fraud on your deed, you can stop the whole scheme. The Territorial Land Office won't ignore a pattern, but you need that original document. And you need to move fast." "How do you know all this?" Mirabelle asked. Ruth smiled. "I've been working in the Harrison Hotel kitchen for 3 months. Turns out railroad men like to talk when they think the help isn't listening." Mirabelle felt a flicker of hope. If Ruth was telling the truth, they might actually have a chance. But she'd learned not to trust windfalls. "What do you want in return?" she asked. Ruth's expression turned serious. "I want you to make sure the families on that list don't lose their homes. Your grandfather would have done the same." Mercer studied the older woman for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We'll do it." "Good." Ruth gathered her reins. "One more thing. The lawyer Clay's meeting. Name's Martin Voss. He's slick and he's careful. You won't get that deed back by asking nicely." "Then how?" "Use your imagination." Ruth kicked her horse into motion and rode away, disappearing into the dark. Mirabelle turned to Mercer. "Do you trust her?" "No. But I believe her. My grandfather ran with some rough people before he settled down. If Ruth Calhoun was one of them, she'd know how to gather information. And she'd have her own reasons for wanting the railroad checked. So what do we do?" He looked at the boarding house, then at the hotel down the street. "We get that deed back. Tonight." "Tonight," Mirabelle echoed. "Mercer, that's breaking and entering." "Yes. We could be arrested." "We already are, as far as the sheriff's concerned. He's just waiting for the right moment." She knew he was right. They'd crossed a line this afternoon. There was no going back to safe. No pretending she was just a quiet schoolteacher minding her own business. "All right," she said. "Tell me the plan." They spent an hour planning. Mirabelle changed into dark clothing, a simple wool dress and her heaviest shawl. Mercer found a back entrance to the Harrison Hotel through the alley. The kitchen door, just like Ruth had said. It was locked, but the window beside it wasn't latched properly. Inside, the hotel was quiet. Most guests were either asleep or drinking in the saloon next door. They moved through the dim hallway like ghosts. The stairs creaked under their weight. Mirabelle's heart hammered so loud she was sure someone would hear it. Third floor. Room 14. Mercer tried the door. Locked. He pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket and worked the mechanism. Mirabelle kept watch, ears straining for footsteps. The lock clicked. Mercer pushed the door open and they slipped inside. The room was small and plain. A bed, a desk, a washstand. Mercer moved to the desk and started searching. Mirabelle checked the wardrobe. Nothing. She knelt and looked under the bed. Still nothing. "It's not here," Mercer said quietly. "It has to be. He's smart. He wouldn't keep it in his room." Mirabelle's mind raced. Then where? She turned and looked at the room with fresh eyes. A traveling man wouldn't carry important documents loose. He'd keep them secure. Hidden. She crossed to the wardrobe again and ran her hands along the interior. Her fingers caught on a seam that didn't sit quite right. She pressed. A panel popped open. Inside was a leather satchel. Mercer crossed to her in 2 steps. She opened the satchel. Inside were papers, contracts, letters, and at the bottom, a single folded document sealed with wax. She pulled it out carefully and broke the seal. The deed to Larkspur Ranch. Original. Signed by Jonas Granger in 1862. Witnessed and notarized. "We've got it," she whispered. Mercer took it from her hands like it was made of glass. His face was unreadable. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it inside his shirt, against his skin. "Let's go." They made it down the stairs and halfway across the lobby before the front door opened. Clay Ridgway walked in. He was younger than Mirabelle expected, maybe 30, with sandy hair and an easy smile. The smile died when he saw them. "Mercer," he said. "What are you doing here?" Mercer didn't answer. He just walked forward. Clay's hand moved toward his belt. Mercer was faster. He grabbed Clay's wrist and twisted. Clay yelped and dropped to one knee. "You stole from me," Mercer said quietly. "You burned my barn. You sold me out to the railroad." "I didn't have a choice," Clay gasped. "They threatened my family. So you destroyed mine." "Mercer, I'm sorry." "No. You're not. But you will be." He let go and stepped back. Clay scrambled to his feet and ran. Mercer didn't chase him. He just stood there, breathing hard, fists clenched. Mirabelle touched his arm. "We need to go. Before he brings the sheriff." Mercer nodded. They slipped out the side door and into the alley. The night air was cold and sharp. Mirabelle's lungs burned. They ran until they reached the edge of town, then stopped to catch their breath. "What now?" she asked. "Now we take this to Cheyenne. File it with the Territorial Land Office. Make sure it's recorded properly. That's a 3-day ride." "I know." He looked at her. "You don't have to come." "Yes, I do." "Mirabelle, I told you. I'm not walking away." He pulled her close and kissed her. hard and desperate. She felt the tremble in his hands, felt the fear he wouldn't admit. When he pulled back, his eyes were burning. "If we do this, there's no going back," he said. "The railroad will come after you. The sheriff will arrest you. You'll lose your job, your reputation, everything you've built. I lost everything a long time ago." She touched his face. "This is the first time I felt like I was building something that mattered." They left before dawn. Mercer borrowed a horse from a friend who owed him a favor. They rode north through open country, pushing hard. The land was flat and cold and empty. By midday, Mirabelle's legs ached and her hands were numb. She didn't complain. Mercer rode like a man possessed, his face set and distant. They stopped twice, once to water the horses, once to rest for an hour in the thin shade of a rock outcrop. Mercer spread his coat on the ground and Mirabelle lay down beside him. He pulled her close and they slept in a tangle of exhaustion and trust. When they woke, the sun was lower. They rode on. By the time they reached the first relay station, it was full dark. The station keeper was an old man with one eye and a suspicious nature. He looked at them like they were trouble. "We need fresh horses," Mercer said. "I can pay." The old man spat. "You running from something. Towards something. That's supposed to make me feel better." Mercer pulled out a gold coin and set it on the counter. The old man looked at it, then at Mirabelle, then back at Mercer. "You've got 1 hour," he said. "Then I want you gone." They ate stale bread and tough jerky in silence. Mercer's hand never left the inside of his coat where the deed was hidden. Mirabelle watched him, saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to the door. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "That we're not going to make it?" "Yes, we are." He looked at her. "You don't know that. I know you. You don't give up. I've given up on plenty of things. Not this. Not when it matters." He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was tight, desperate. "How do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Believe. Even when everything is falling apart." She thought about that. About all the times she'd wanted to stop running, to give up, to let the past swallow her whole, and about the small, stubborn part of her that kept moving forward anyway. "Because the alternative is worse," she said. "Because if I stop believing, I stop fighting. And if I stop fighting, I'm already dead." He nodded slowly. Then he lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me why I'm doing this." They rode out an hour later on fresh horses. The moon was high and bright. The land stretched out silver and endless. Mercer set a brutal pace. Mirabelle held on and tried not to think about how far they still had to go. Dawn broke cold and clear. They were still 20 miles from Cheyenne. Mercer's face was gray with exhaustion. Mirabelle's entire body ached. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Every hour they delayed was another hour the railroad had to move against them. They reached Cheyenne just before noon. The town was bigger than Eagle Bend, busier, full of noise and movement. Mercer led them straight to the Territorial Land Office. It was a square brick building with barred windows and a heavy door. Inside, a clerk sat behind a tall desk, looking bored. "I need to file a property deed," Mercer said. The clerk didn't look up. "Fill out the form. $3 filing fee. This is urgent. There's a fraudulent deed on record. I need to correct it." That got the clerk's attention. He looked up. "Fraudulent, you say?" "Yes." Mercer pulled out the deed and laid it on the desk. This is the original title to Larkspur Ranch, recorded in 1862. Someone filed a fake deed 2 weeks ago claiming the property belongs to a railroad corporation. The clerk studied the document. His expression shifted from bored to interested. This looks legitimate. It is legitimate. That's the problem. The other deed is fake. The clerk stood. I'll need to get the land agent. He disappeared through a back door. Mirabelle moved closer to Mercer. Do you think he'll help? I don't know. But we're out of options. The door opened again. A man in a dark suit emerged. He was tall and thin with sharp eyes and a careful mouth. He looked at Mercer, then at Mirabelle, then at the deed on the desk. I'm Samuel Grant, land agent for this district. You're claiming fraud. I'm proving fraud, Mercer said. He laid out the story, the stolen deed, the forged transfer, the burned barn, the railroad's plan to seize properties across the region. Grant listened without interrupting. His expression gave nothing away. When Mercer finished, Grant picked up the deed and examined it closely. He held it to the light, checked the seal, ran his fingers over the signatures. This is genuine, he said finally. So you'll invalidate the other deed. It's not that simple. The Wyoming Land Development Corporation has legal standing. If they filed in good faith, they have rights. They didn't file in good faith, Mirabelle said. They stole the original document and forged a replacement. That's not a legal claim. That's theft. Grant looked at her. And you are someone who knows how these land grabs work. My father was destroyed by the same tactics. I won't let it happen again. Grant's expression shifted slightly. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. I'll open an investigation. But that takes time. Weeks, maybe months. We don't have weeks, Mercer said. The railroad is moving on other families right now. If we don't stop them today, 6 more ranches will be gone by the end of the month. Grant was silent for a long moment. Then he said, there's a federal marshal in town. If I can convince him there's criminal fraud involved, he can issue an injunction. That would freeze all pending transfers until the investigation is complete. Do it, Mercer said. I'll need your sworn statements, both of you, and any evidence you have. They spent the next 2 hours giving testimony. Mirabelle's hands shook as she signed her name. She was putting everything on record now. Her real name. Her connection to Mercer. Her involvement in what the sheriff would call theft. There was no hiding anymore. When they finished, Grant folded the papers and locked them in a safe. I'll take this to Marshal Keene this afternoon. If he agrees, the injunction will be issued by tomorrow morning. And if he doesn't agree, Mirabelle asked, then you'll need a lawyer and a lot of patience. They left the land office and stood on the street, blinking in the bright sunlight. Mercer looked hollowed out. Mirabelle felt the same. They'd done everything they could. Now they just had to wait. We should find a hotel, she said. Get some rest. He nodded. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at nothing. Mercer, I keep thinking about what happens next. If we win, the railroad will come after us. They have money and lawyers and politicians. We'll be fighting for years. Then we fight for years. And if we lose, then we lose together. She took his hand. I'm not going anywhere. He pulled her close and buried his face in her hair. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Yes, you do. You've been fighting alone for too long. Let me stand with you. They found a small hotel near the edge of town. Clean but plain. One room. Mercer didn't ask if she wanted separate accommodations. She wouldn't have said yes anyway. They'd gone past propriety, past caution. This was survival now. And something more. That night, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, too exhausted to do more than hold each other. Mirabelle listened to Mercer's breathing slow and deepen, felt the warmth of him against her skin, tried to memorize this feeling of safety. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to Eagle Bend, to the sheriff, to Clay and the railroad men and Ruth Calhoun's warning. They'd left a trail of disrupted plans behind them. Someone would follow. Someone always did. In the morning, they returned to the land office. Grant was waiting. His face was carefully neutral. Mirabelle's stomach dropped. "The marshal reviewed your case," Grant said. "He's issuing a temporary injunction. All property transfers involving the Wyoming Land Development Corporation are frozen pending investigation." Mercer sagged with relief. Mirabelle felt tears prick her eyes. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. But Grant wasn't finished. "There's a condition. You both need to return to Eagle Bend and make yourselves available for questioning. The marshal wants to interview witnesses. And the local sheriff has filed a complaint claiming you committed theft and destruction of property." "So we go back and get arrested," Mercer said flatly. "Possibly. Or you cooperate fully and let the investigation prove your innocence." Mirabelle's chest tightened. They were being forced to walk back into the trap. But they didn't have a choice. If they ran now, they'd look guilty. The injunction would be lifted. Everything they'd fought for would be lost. "We'll go back," she said. Mercer looked at her. "Are you sure?" "No. But we're doing it anyway." They left Cheyenne that afternoon. The ride back felt longer, heavier. Mirabelle kept expecting someone to stop them, to arrest them before they even reached town. But the road stayed empty. The sky stayed clear. It felt wrong. Too easy. They reached Eagle Bend after dark. The town looked the same. Quiet. Ordinary. But Mirabelle could feel the tension in the air. News traveled fast in small places. Everyone would know they'd left. Everyone would be waiting to see what happened next. Mercer took her straight to the boarding house. She packed her few belongings in silence. When she turned, he was standing in the doorway, watching her. "You can still walk away," he said. "Tell them I forced you. They'll believe it." "No, they won't. And I'm not leaving you." "Mirabelle, stop trying to protect me. I made my choice. Now let me live with it." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. Held her so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know it's too soon and too complicated, and maybe too dangerous. But I need you to know." Her breath caught. She pulled back just enough to look at his face. Saw the fear and the honesty and the raw, desperate hope. "I love you too," she whispered. He kissed her. Deep and slow and full of all the things they might not get to say again. When they finally broke apart, she was shaking. They walked to the sheriff's office together. The street was empty. No one wanted to be seen watching. The sheriff was waiting behind his desk. He didn't look surprised. "Mercer Granger. Mirabelle Mercer. You're both under arrest for theft and trespassing." "We have an injunction from the Territorial Land Office," Mercer said. He pulled out the papers Grant had given them. "All property transfers are frozen. The deed I recovered is the legal title to my ranch." The sheriff barely glanced at the papers. That's for a judge to decide. Until then, you're in my custody." He gestured to the cells in the back. 2 deputies appeared from the shadows. One took Mercer's arm. The other reached for Mirabelle. She pulled away. "Don't touch me." "Ma'am, you need to cooperate." "I am cooperating. I'm also telling you that if you put me in that cell, the federal marshal will hear about it within the hour." The sheriff's mouth thinned. "You're threatening me." "I'm informing you. There's a difference." He stared at her. She stared back. Finally, he waved the deputy away. "Fine. You can wait in the front office. But if you try to leave, I'll have you in irons." She sat in the hard wooden chair near the window and watched them lock Mercer in a cell. He didn't fight, didn't protest, just walked in and sat down on the narrow cot like he'd expected this all along. The hours dragged. Mirabelle dozed in the chair, jolting awake every time the door opened. Townspeople came and went. Some stared. Some whispered. No one spoke to her directly. At dawn, the door opened again. Marshal Keene walked in. He was older than Mirabelle expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and a weathered face. He looked at the sheriff, then at Mirabelle, then at Mercer in the cell. "Release him," Keene said. The sheriff's face went red. "Marshal, these 2 are criminals. They're witnesses in a federal investigation. And unless you want to explain to a territorial judge why you're interfering, you'll let them go." Now, the sheriff unlocked the cell. Mercer walked out slowly, his face unreadable. Keene gestured for them to follow him outside. On the street, Keene turned to face them. "I've reviewed your statements. I've also interviewed Ruth Calhoun and several other witnesses. There's enough evidence to charge Clay Ridgway and 2 railroad executives with fraud and conspiracy. The injunction stands. Your ranch is safe." Mirabelle felt the tension drain out of her. Mercer's hand found hers and squeezed. They'd won. Against every odd, they'd actually won. But Keene wasn't finished. "Miss Mercer, there's another matter. I contacted the authorities in Kansas regarding the charges your brother filed against you 2 years ago." Her stomach dropped. Of course, she'd given her real name. Now the past had caught up. The judge reviewed the case. Keene continued. "Your brother recanted his testimony 6 months ago. Admitted he lied under pressure from railroad investigators. All charges against you have been dismissed." Mirabelle's knees went weak. Mercer's arm came around her waist, holding her up. She couldn't speak, couldn't process what she'd just heard. "You're free," Keene said gently. "You've been free for half a year. You just didn't know it." She turned and buried her face against Mercer's chest. He held her while she shook. Not crying. Just feeling the weight of 2 years of fear fall away all at once. When she could finally speak, she looked up at Keene. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your brother. He's the one who came forward." She didn't know how to feel about that. Anger. Relief. Betrayal. Forgiveness. Maybe all of it at once. Keene tipped his hat. "I'll be in town for another week finishing the investigation. If you need anything, let me know." Then he walked away, leaving them standing alone in the empty street. Mercer tilted her face up. "You're free," he said softly. "So are you." He smiled. That crooked, devastating smile. "So what do we do now?" She thought about that. About the schoolhouse and the ranch and the life they could build if they were brave enough to try. About all the reasons it would be hard and complicated, and maybe impossible. And then she thought about the way he looked at her, the way he'd fought beside her, the way he'd believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. "We go home," she said. "We rebuild. We fight anyone who tries to take it away again. And we do it together." He kissed her, right there in the middle of Main Street, in full view of anyone who cared to look. It was scandalous, improper, exactly the kind of thing that would get her fired from her teaching job. She didn't care. When they finally broke apart, the sun was fully up. The town was waking. People were starting to move on the boardwalks. Mirabel could feel them watching, judging, whispering. "Let them talk," Mercer said quietly, like he'd read her mind. She smiled. Let them. They walked to the livery stable and collected Mercer's horse, rode out to Larkspur Ranch together. The barn was still a ruin. The house still looked beaten. But the land was theirs. The sky was clear. And for the first time in a long time, Mirabel felt like she could breathe. They spent the day cleaning, salvaging what they could from the barn, boarding up broken windows, making lists of what needed to be rebuilt. It was hard work, exhausting, but it felt good, like building something real instead of just surviving. That evening, they sat on the porch steps and watched the sunset. Mercer's arm was around her shoulders. Her head rested against his chest. The sky turned gold and pink and deep purple. Stars began to appear. "I need to tell you something," Mercer said. She tensed. "What?" "My real name isn't Mercer Granger." She pulled back and looked at him. "What?" "It's Mercer Calhoun. I changed it when I took over the ranch. My grandfather wanted me to have a fresh start, away from the family reputation." "Calhoun," she repeated. "Like Ruth. She's my grandmother." Mirabel stared at him. "You didn't think to mention that. I didn't know if I could trust you. And I didn't want you to judge me for what my family used to be." She thought about that, about all the things she'd hidden, all the lies she'd told to stay safe. She understood better than anyone. "What did your family used to be?" she asked quietly. "Outlaws. Horse thieves. Mostly. Some robbery. My grandfather went straight after he met my grandmother. But the reputation followed him. That's why I use Granger. It was my grandmother's maiden name." "Does anyone in Eagle Bend know?" Mirabel asked. "A few. The older folks. But most people have forgotten. Or they don't care." She leaned back against his shoulder. "I don't care either. Your past doesn't define you. What you do now does." He kissed the top of her head. "Same goes for you." They sat in silence as the stars brightened. Mirabel felt something settle inside her, a peace she hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. This man, this place, this hard-won safety. It was more than she'd ever hoped for. "Marry me," Mercer said. She froze. "What?" "I know it's fast. I know we've barely had time to breathe. But I don't want to wait. I don't want to lose you." He pulled back and looked at her. "Marry me, Mirabel. Build this life with me. Fight beside me. Let me love you the way you deserve." Her throat closed. Tears stung her eyes. She'd never let herself imagine this. Never thought she'd be safe enough to say yes. "Yes," she whispered. He pulled her into his lap and kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise. She kissed him back and let herself believe. Believe in this. In him. In the future they were going to build together. They were married 3 days later in the small church on the edge of Eagle Bend. Ruth Calhoun stood as witness. The marshal attended. A handful of townspeople came, curious and cautious. The sheriff didn't show. Mirabelle wore her burgundy dress, cleaned and mended. Mercer wore a new shirt and his best coat. They stood before the preacher and made promises that felt both terrifying and inevitable. To love, to protect, to stand together no matter what came. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Mercer pulled her close and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The small crowd clapped. Ruth smiled. And Mirabelle felt something break open inside her. Not fear, not grief, but hope. Wild and reckless and real. After the ceremony, they rode back to Larkspur Ranch. The barn had been partially rebuilt. Neighbors had helped, brought lumber and nails and labor. It wasn't charity, it was community. The kind Mirabelle had stopped believing in. That night they lay together in the ranch house bedroom. The window was open. Cool air drifted in, carrying the smell of prairie grass and distant rain. Mercer's hand traced lazy patterns on her skin. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. She thought about that. About everything they'd been through. Everything they'd lost and found and fought for. About the future stretching out ahead of them. Uncertain and dangerous and full of possibility. "Yes," she said. "I am." He pulled her closer. "Good. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." She smiled and closed her eyes. Listened to his heartbeat. Felt the rise and fall of his breathing. Let herself sink into the warmth and the safety and the love. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She was home. 2 weeks later, Mirabelle stood at the front of the Eagle Bend schoolhouse and looked out at her students. The school board had tried to fire her after the arrest, but Marshall Keene's testimony had changed minds. So had a petition signed by half the families in town. She'd kept her job. More than that, she'd earned respect. The kind you couldn't buy or fake. The kind that came from standing up when it mattered. After school, she walked back to the ranch. It was a long walk, but she didn't mind. The sky was wide and blue. The grass rippled in the wind. Mercer was waiting on the porch when she arrived. He'd been working on the new barn all day. His shirt was dusty and his face was tired, but he smiled when he saw her. "How was school?" he asked. "Good." Jamie Thornton finally learned his multiplication tables. "About time. Kid's been struggling all year." She climbed the steps and kissed him. He tasted like dust and sweat and home. When she pulled back, he was grinning. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." She laughed. "You're covered in sawdust and your ranch is half built and we're probably going to be poor for the next 5 years. And I've got you. So yes. Lucky." She shook her head, but she was smiling. They went inside together. The house was small and plain, but it was theirs. They'd chosen every board and nail, every piece of furniture, every scrap of fabric on the windows. That night, they ate dinner at the small kitchen table, talked about the day, made plans for tomorrow, argued about whether to plant corn or wheat in the south field. It was ordinary. Mundane. Exactly what Mirabelle had never thought she'd have. Later, as they lay in bed, Mercer's hand found hers in the dark. "I have something to tell you," he said. Her chest tightened. "What?" "I'm not afraid anymore. Of losing this. Of losing you." I spent so long waiting for everything to fall apart that I forgot how to just live. But you taught me. You showed me that fighting is worth it, that love is worth it. She turned and kissed him, slow and deep. When she pulled back, she said, "You taught me the same thing. I spent 2 years hiding, being invisible. You made me brave again. We made each other brave." Yes. They fell asleep tangled together, the window open to the night sky. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly. Inside, they held each other and dreamed of the life they were building. A life full of work and struggle and simple joy. A life they'd fought for and earned and refused to give up. In the morning, they woke to sunlight and birdsong. Mercer kissed her forehead and got up to start the day. Mirabelle lay there for a moment longer, listening to him move around the house, listening to the sound of home. She'd spent so long running from her past, so long believing she didn't deserve a future. But here she was, safe, loved, free. She got up and dressed, pinned her hair, looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd arrived in Eagle Bend 6 months ago. Stronger, steadier, unafraid. She walked out to the porch and found Mercer waiting. He held out his hand. She took it. Together, they walked toward the barn and the fields and the work that waited, toward the life they'd chosen, the life they'd built together from nothing but courage and honesty and love. And as the sun climbed higher and the day began, Mirabelle Calhoun smiled. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She was